Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and this is my Friday edition of my Morning Musings. And in my Friday videos, I review books that challenge covenant eschatology, books, videos, articles, what have you. And by the way, we're coming down to the close of my review of this particular book, which is The Future of Rome. My review of this won't last all that much longer. I believe I've dealt sufficiently, to be honest about it, with the chapter in this book by Peter Oakes. Mr. Oakes is guilty, it seems to me, to be as respectful as possible, is guilty of massive presuppositional argumentation, of presumptive argumentation. He is guilty of overlooking, as I've suggested before, of some of the most fundamental, critical theological aspects of the book of Revelation that help us definitively define who Babylon of Revelation was. And once again, Mr. Oakes believes that Babylon was Rome, being cryptically and symbolically referred to as Babylon. And I've looked at some of the underlying assumptions that Mr. Oakes incorporates. And this morning, I'm going to share with you, once again, some of what I'm going to share with you this morning will be somewhat repetitious because it's so important to catch the power of what Mr. Oakes is doing. How he glosses over certain elements of the book of Revelation and how they related strictly to Israel. And they can only be applied to Rome in the vaguest, most generic of ways. One of the most glaring oversights of Mr. Oakes' chapter is the fact that he utterly ignores the old covenant, and by that emphasis, covenant context of the book. Now, someone who's read his chapter may say, no, wait a minute, Preston. He points out that John quotes from Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel 23, from Isaiah. Yeah, he quotes from those. Well, yes, he does. But he does so very selectively, very carefully, in order, or so it seems to me, in order to avoid the emphasis of Revelation on that covenantal context. It's not enough to say, well, Mr. Oakes refers to some Old Testament passages. Sorry, that's insufficient. Because even in some of those passages that he alludes to, that God's covenant with Israel is very much present. For instance, Ezekiel chapter 16. He even emphasizes, let me see if I can get to that page very quickly. That would be pages 320, 321, in which he mentions that John is quoting from, citing, alluding to Ezekiel chapter 23. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, Ezekiel 16, excuse me. Ezekiel chapter 16 has nothing whatsoever to do with Rome, period. It is how God called, to use the terminology, found Israel as an abandoned baby, still wrapped in swaddling clothes. He took her, he washed her, he salted her. Pardon me. He clothed her with beautiful garments, and she became a harlot, and thus he had to destroy her. Now, somebody tell me how that has to do with Rome. God never did any of that with Rome. Okay, so that's just one of the many lacuna, gaps, if you please, that I find in Peter Oak's chapter. Now, the very first thing, or second thing I want to share with you here is found on page 219. And he makes a comment, and I realize this is highly controversial, but that's okay. I am convinced it's absolutely true. And this is something that I think is grossly overlooked in the literature. He says, again on page 219, the beast of Revelation, is given authority by a figure called the dragon. Revelation 13:2. Now watch this, which has featured in Revelation chapter 12. Wow. Okay, so the dragon gives the beast its authority. This is incredibly challenging, not only to Mr. Oak's paradigm, but to those who take the beast as Rome, which I generally have. But I've shared with you in other videos that in the book of Revelation, the great dragon, i.e. Satan, is seen as personified by Israel, or Israel is personified by the dragon. Now, how and why do I make that association? Well, because in Revelation chapter 2, Revelation chapter 3, the great persecutor of the saints is none other than Israel. Those who are of the synagogue of Satan, those who say they are Jews, but are not, but are liars. So in Revelation 2, Revelation chapter 3, who was it that was imprisoning the saints? Revelation chapter 2, 9 and 10. Well, it was the devil. But who was it actually? It was Israel. It was the Jews in the city. Now, it was Satan instigating that. If a person, and I'm still up in the air about this, if a person takes the idea that Satan is an actual spiritual being, okay, if the devil, the adversary, is just simply is a term that is used for that actual spirit being, then what we find is just like in Luke, when Peter objected to Jesus saying that he was going to be crucified, and Peter said, "Not so, Lord." So we're ready to die for you. And Jesus responded, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Well, he wasn't saying that Peter was actually a spirit being named Satan, adversary. No, he was saying that Peter was his adversary. And that's what the word means. I hope you see the point I'm making here. Either way, all right, whether one takes the view that there is a literal spiritual being called Satan, or that there was, Revelation 20 shows him being destroyed. So whether one takes that position, or whether he takes the position that Satan was the mover and the shaker of Israel to persecute the saints, it does not matter. It's still Israel being the adversary. There are other indications throughout the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 6, which draws extensively from Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, in predicting the last day of the Lord, to take away the blood guilt of Jerusalem, Isaiah chapter 4, verse 4, in what is called the war of Isaiah chapter 3, 18 to 24, when Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword, which is directly echoed, by the way, in Luke 21 and verse 24. And so what you have in Isaiah chapter 2 through 4 is a direct reference back let me rephrase that. What you have in Revelation chapter 6, when men would run to the hills, hide in the caves, cry to the rocks, fall on us, that is taken directly from Isaiah chapter 2, 19 to 21. But Isaiah is predicting the last days, day of the Lord, when the martyrs would be vindicated. Well, that's what John is appealing to in Revelation chapter 6. So once again, who's the great persecutor in the book of Revelation? It's Satan. But in Isaiah chapter 2 through 4, it's Jerusalem and Israel. But John is drawing directly on Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 to predict the coming vindication of the martyrs at the destruction of Babylon, the great persecutor, and the great persecutor is Satan. Did you follow all that? Did you catch all that? In Revelation, Satan is the great persecutor. However, in Revelation, Satan is the great persecutor. Now, you either have two disparate, distinctive, great persecutors, or you have one great persecutor. And in Revelation, there's only one. There's only one. It is Babylon, which is the city where the Lord was crucified, acting as the agent, to use this terminology, as the agent of Satan, the great persecutor. That's brought out in Revelation chapter 12, where Satan, the great dragon, attempts to kill the man-child, the Messiah. Failing that, he pursues the seed of the man-child. So who was it that persecuted the church in the first century? And by the way, let me make the point again. If you take the late date of the book of Revelation, as does Mr. Oakes, that means that he's putting it under Domitian, and the evidence for Domitianic persecution of the church is scant. It's slim. It virtually doesn't exist. So how are you going to identify Babylon as Rome, the great persecutor, at the time of the writing of the book of Revelation, when you can't even prove that Domitian persecuted the church? When you cannot prove that Rome persecuted the church? This is problematic, and it's fatal. Okay, so here's the point. Mr. Oakes says, and he rightly points it out, from Revelation chapter 13, verse 2, 13, 3 to 4, etc., the great dragon, the great persecutor, gives authority to the beast. Now, if Satan is identified as Rome, that doesn't work. Okay? Because you have, pardon me, you have this Satan giving authority to the beast to persecute. But return to the previous point. Domitian didn't persecute the church. So who's this talking about? However, and that is, by the way, if you're identifying the beast as Rome. However, if we identify the beast as somehow belonging to or identified as Jerusalem, that fits awfully well. Got a lot more to cover here. I throw that out there for your consideration, okay? If Satan gave power to the beast to persecute, or if Satan gave power to Jerusalem. Now, here's what we do know. We know that under Domitian allowed the Jews to persecute. So in that scenario, one could identify possibly Rome as the beast. But wait a minute. The beast doesn't give Satan, the great serpent, the power to persecute, unless you're identifying the serpent as Israel. You see how this goes? There's a lot to be worked out here. But Mr. Oakes' statement, the beast is given authority to a figure called the serpent, really presents some daunting challenges to the idea that the beast is Rome. Okay, I got to go on. I've got a lot I want to cover in this particular video. Now, on the bottom of page 219, Mr. Oakes says, among the more historically oriented suggested identifications of the beasts, plural, of Revelation 13 are that the beast from the sea is either the Roman governor arriving in the province of Asia by boat, or more broadly, the Roman state. The beast from the earth is most commonly seen as representing the imperial cult, although other suggestions include, again, the provincial governors. Then he embarks on a discussion of 666. However, the healed wound and link to the number 666 suggests to most commentators that there is a reference to Nero. Now, what does that do? That takes the discussion out from under the Domitianic period. If you're going to say that the beast is 666, i.e. Nero, then it's not Domitian. Do you see how this is running in circles here? So he continues. In particular, the healed wound and the descriptions in 17:8 and 11 of the beast as having been, not currently being. How does current absence work in a vision? Good question. But returning suggests a link to the Nero redo or Nero Redivivus myths that were well known in the late 1st and early 2nd centuries. For instance, Tacitus, in his history, either Nero never died and will return to the head of an army from the east, or Nero did die but will return to life and take revenge on his enemies. This, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the more troublesome suggestions in the entirety of Mr. Oakes' chapter. Because he, citing several authorities, Tacitus, calls attention to the fact that after Nero killed himself, or his servant actually finished the job for him, there was a rumor that arose in the East, generally speaking, in Parthia, that Nero had not really died. On the contrary, he was secreted out of Rome, taken to Parthia, and there he was raising an army. He was going to come back and destroy Rome. Or, as Mr. Oakes notes, other parts of that scenario say, well, yes, he actually did commit suicide by his servant, but he was raised from the dead. After all, Revelation chapter 17 talks about the beast receiving a death stroke or a stroke of the head, but he was revived. That's supposedly Nero. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's my problem with that. Are we to believe that the inspired writer, John, through the Holy Spirit, sent from the Father, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God, that's the Father, gave to him, to Jesus, to show to his servants things which must shortly come to pass. So are we to believe that the Father was incorporating a false narrative, a false rumor into the book of Revelation, saying these things must shortly come to pass? Well, that would have been a lie, wouldn't it? Because Nero was dead. Or Nero was not raised from the dead. Choose your poison here. And he certainly was not revived, certainly did not come back under Domitian. He did not raise an army in Parthia. He did not come back and destroy the city. So it seems to me that Mr. Oakes is vacillating here between trying to identify Rome as the great persecutor, i.e. under Domitian, and then trying to incorporate the story of Nero Redivivus in trying to make sense of Revelation chapter 13 and Revelation chapter 17. It strikes me as extremely tenuous, extremely specious, if you please, literally unbelievable, to suggest that the Father inspired the Son to tell John and to tell the churches, Nero either wasn't killed, he's in Parthia, he's raising an army, he's about to come back very soon and destroy Rome. And once again, you see, that removes the entire narrative from having anything to do with Israel. You see the problem? It removes the city where the Lord was crucified from the entire story. That's untenable. So the question today is, would or did God inspire his Son to tell the churches that Nero was still alive, or that Nero was about to be raised from the dead, go to, from in Parthia, raise an army, come back and destroy Rome? Ladies and gentlemen, this to me is a classic example of how scholars commonly overlook what is fundamental, i.e., the covenantal nature of the book of Revelation, the covenantal identity of the great city Babylon, the fact that Babylon is where the Lord was crucified, the fact that Jerusalem was in a partnership with Rome. Rome turned on her and destroyed her, just like Revelation 17 describes. You see, you've got to ignore or mitigate all of that information in order to rely on the Nero Redivivus story and narrative. I find that totally unacceptable, totally unbelievable, totally unscriptural. Okay, out of time for today. Thank you. I don't want to go into a bunch of other stuff. It'd take me too long on the other stuff that I want to get to today. So thank you for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings as we are reviewing the book, The Future of Rome. Don't forget, join Mike Sullivan and me tonight on Preterist Apologetics. And folks, be sure to visit my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Got some good book orders, special offerings on books. You want to take advantage of it. But again, thank you for joining me. I'll see you on the flip side.